Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with the Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, August 25th. Thanks so much for joining me. We are streaming live again on X, the social media company formerly known as Twitter. I think that's the right way to say it. We are streaming there now. They've reinstalled our live producer feature that allows us to stream live there. So that looks good. If you're watching on Twitter, a good hello to you too. And a reminder that we don't really pay too much attention to Twitter. Or X, as it's called. So please do mosey on over if you want to participate to either YouTube or Facebook, where it's much easier to have streams. Although, you know what? If you want to leave comments on Twitter, feel free. And maybe I'll try to keep an eye on that too. We'll see if I can. But if you're watching on Twitter, it's nice to see you again. I think the last time we were able to broadcast on Twitter was around March, and they shut down that live producer feature. And now it's back, so there you go. And it's good to see everybody over on YouTube, though. We got Tom Barlow, we got the Flea Dane, we have D. Coleman, Janthy Rongan, SRH, Katie Dozier's here, Clayton Clark, Rose Leonard, Monica Dobos, Mark Grinier, good crew in the house. We also, nice to see everybody saying their locations, too. So we got like Boston, we got Kenosha, Wisconsin, we got Spain, Columbus, Ohio, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Katie, of course, in the next room over here in the Woodlands, Texas. Yeah, so we got a good crowd going here. Nate Jacobs here as well. Sharon Ferrante over on YouTube. On Facebook, what have we got? We got Jenny Middleton over on Facebook. And Marguerite Doyle. Good to see you as well. So we are all loaded up and ready for some poetry. Now, today we're going to do that, going through the oldest submissions in the queue. And so this is the feature where it feels a little bit like reading submissions. I have no idea what's going to come up. There's some submissions that are just over a year old to the Critique of the Week category, and they haven't sort of been randomly chosen, or maybe they only had one poem, and I asked that you do two, so we can fill out a whole show. Sometimes, like the first one here, it's a poet that we've already had before, so I'm going to do quick. So we're going to move quickly through as many of these as we can, and you'll get the submission-type experience of, we can pretend we're all poetry editors. Tara McMahon is here over on Facebook, too. Good to see you. So as always, leave as many comments as you can in the chat windows about these poems as we talk about them. And we're going to try to get through as many as we can. We're the oldest submission in the field that hasn't been looked at yet was July 30th, 2022, so just over a year ago. Hopefully we'll catch up and we'll be everybody who submits. It'd be nice to have everybody within a year have their poems looked at, definitely, for the Critique of the Week. And as always, the point of the critique is to give the workshop experience. It's really valuable, seeing what strangers think about your poems and whether or not, what you intend is coming through. If we can understand what you're saying, how we think the poems are working, the places that they're not. So leave as many comments as you can, and it's a lot of fun. So this is the first submission. Like once I sent this is Xavier Pimentel. I think Xavier has had poems featured a few times in Critique of the Week in the past. I mean, remember, Critique of the Week goes back years. I think it's 5+ years now. 5.5. I think I've been doing this every week, except for a few times I'm like out of town or something. And so a lot of people are able to repeat. And I think in the submission guidelines, we say make sure you only submit if you haven't appeared in the last year. Feel free to submit. And Xavier, definitely, it was over a year ago. Or 2 years now that the first time we featured these, but they're still in the queue. Let's take a look right now, and the first poem is by the window at twilight. So let's take a look at that. Here we go. By the window at twilight, and these are pasted in submissions. One thing, they keep adding features everywhere, which is nice, and sometimes I don't notice. So now, when you paste in your poem, you can now add italics and things like that, which Submittable didn't allow for a while. I have to make sure all the fields allow that, because I didn't even know that they'd added that feature. So that's good for the people who can't, they're using their phones to write poems and submit. It's harder to deal with files when you're on that kind of device. So it's nice to be able to paste, but now you can include italics and bold and things like that, which is nice. Full rich text, as they call it. But anyway, let's take a look at this poem, By the Window at Twilight. And you'll see the formal verse right off the bat here. He stands by the window with rain on the panes, the night of the evening holding him close, his sorrows forgotten in whispering rains. He looks on the sunset that burns like a rose. The dew light shines wet on the green grasses there. The black blue of twilight envelops him now. The somnolent wind sings an Idolic prayer, making him shudder with wonder and wow. He stands by the window with rain on the glass, the night of the evening making him tire. His sorrows forgotten, as all things may pass. He looks on the sunset that burns like a fire. He remembers these evenings and all that he sees. In the safety of twilight and the rain he may hide. Sanctified moments in the dusk, such as these, awaken the faith that has withered and died. So that's the first poem, By the Window at Twilight. And we're going to move as fast as we can through these. But I talk about this all the time, and I talked to Annie Finch just yesterday for the winter issue of Rattle. We talked a lot about form because she's a formalist poet and a witch, which is the fun part. And talking about the way that really any kind of repetition of sound is what formal poetry really is. And it doesn't have to be this tight, but this is a very clearly very tightly formal poem with the rhymes here. And I always talk about how I miss, I wish there were more formal poetry written. It's about 5% of submissions, I estimate. And I wish it was like half the submissions. I think it's worthy of that. I think there's so many ways to, so many forms and styles, and it unlocks writing in so many ways. It makes poems more memorizable, makes the general public like poetry more. I wish we had more form. So it's great to see form first off the bat. I like that. And the rhymes and the meter are done fine in this poem. There's nothing like clunky or wrong, that feels off about it. The only thing I would say is that the details are generic. They're very sort of general, and I don't get a sense of the place. And I don't get a sense of, there's nothing vivid enough in the way it's described to make me feel like I'm at it's sort of, you want a poem to create a scene that you can enter. You're creating this little world, like a little snow globe. You're sort of conjuring with your magic spell, and then you put us in there as readers. And you need some concrete details in order to make that world come to life and make us feel like we're actually living in there. And so these details here, even though the poem is nicely done, I like the rhythm and the repetition and the rhyme. The details aren't specific and concrete enough to make me feel like it's there. I mean, that's why the word concrete, we use the word concrete, use concrete images, because concrete, we feel it. It feels rough. It has a texture. It feels so solid that we can't penetrate it. We want to feel that about the world we're creating. And this poem has, he stands by the window with rain on the panes. It could be any window anywhere. There's no sense of what the window looks like. There's no sense of the feeling of it. There's no unique way of describing it. It's just a sort of a generic window pane. The night of the evening holding him close, his sorrow forgotten, whispering rains. So we get the night, it's night raining, there's a window pane, but it's all generic. It's just very stark and minimalistic in what it could be. It's like the set decorations for Waiting for Godot. It's just like a coat hook. There's really nothing more going on. It's a very empty kind of description. He looks on the sunset that burns like a rose. The dew light shines wet on the green grasses there. The blue black of twilight envelops him. Now, so we get all these just generic descriptions that aren't making a vivid feel. You have to conjure that kind of space somehow. So that's the main thing. The main takeaway from this poem is that while I like the rhythms and the sound and the repetition, the rhymes, the fact that it's formal in the first place, the images are just too generic to really conjure up a world. And we need more, show don't tell type things too. Rely more on the heavy things, the nouns, than the verbs and the especially adjectives. Just to make the poem feel more concrete so we can enter it. Even a few, one or two little details that are really concrete make a whole poem come to life, and that's what's missing in here. So that's the thing to focus on in this work, I would say. Yeah. So beyond that, let's see. So Mark Goodner says, ending with an unrhymed couplet seems strange in this regular sonnet. It's not a sonnet. It's 16 lines, and with a A-B rhyme scheme. And there's some little one line repeats, doesn't it? Or do more lines repeat? Just one. He stands by the window. So these lines or almost. I guess it's not. So this line, it doesn't completely repeat. It partially repeats. One of the things I was going to suggest with this is it's a poem that fits already as a pantoum. And let's pull up the pantoum format. Let's see. Hang on 1 second. Let me let me find something good about the pantoum. Is there something little? I want to see a chart. Is there anything that shows you a chart that with a rhyme scheme of pantoum I can find really quick? Anyway, I think this would work with a pantoum. Of course, the poets.org shows you an example of a pantoum here on their page, poets.org/glossary/pantoum, and where do these enormous children come from? More later, so we have this, and then so the pantoum is the second and the fourth lines become the first and the third, and that's the structure that it goes. So we repeat these lines. In this poem here, if you look at it, it has a kind of repetition that lends itself to the pantoum. It feels a little long for what it's saying, and I think the pantoum form would be nice too to shorten it up and have that repetition be a little stronger. So I think that's a good way to be doing it too. So we add more concrete detail and make it a pantoum. My suggestions for these ones. It's funny, if you're wondering what I was searching for on Google, well, it's not going to drop down. There was some in Rogan, like my search history dropped down. And there was a poem that was submitted just a while ago calling someone an incel who'd been on Joe Rogan. And I was thinking, it would be a libelous maybe to publish this if there's not any evidence that the person is an incel. So I was looking that up. The funny things you look up when you're a poetry editor. Anyway, that is By the Window at Twilight. And let's see. We were trying to go fast through these. Katie Doder says, formal as in structured, but not as in polite distance from the poem. This feels too distant from the potential meaning. I think she's referring to a past comment she had. But yeah, so the poem does feel, it's very stiff and distant, and that's the issue. And we want to create the space. So with a few concrete details, and I suggest to make it a pantoum. I think it would work really well in that form. So try that. And then if you have those concrete details, let's look up, instead of that, let's look up pantoum from, this is from the window of the room where I write. This is the poem from Rattle that won the Rattle Poetry Prize a while ago. You can see a good example of a pantoum. But I just want to show you how this poem has a few, see, it's not just a field covered with dew, like that generic image. It's sunset, the russet oak turns into a lamp. And then that ends up being something that's repeated because the pantoum ends with the beginning at the end too. You can make it as many stanzas as you want in a pantoum, by the way, too. And so, each polished leaf glows amber, lit by sun. As a child, I raked leaves with my mother each fall. So we move through it like that, but the specific details like that, are what make the poem come to life, and that those concrete details are what's repeated, or what make the poem really work. So let's see. See if there's any other. And Nate Jacob says, punctuate, please. I'm not like a poem should always be punctuated. But and this poem I think works without it, only because there's so little enjambment. Most of the lines, and that's one of the reasons why it feels like a pantoum. I should have said too, is that since pantoums repeat all those lines, it's like this sort of moving in and out of these repetitions kind of feature where everything's echoing against itself and you're sort of jamming it again. Each line really stands alone, and that allows it to not have punctuation because the lines there's so little enjambment that the lines sort of don't need to be punctuated because the line itself is like the punctuation. So that's one of the reasons why it feels pantoomish as well. Let's take a look at the next one, February Gray. Actually, let me before we move on, let's take, because I didn't look at Facebook. I have to remember to look everywhere I have comments. And so Jenny Middleton says, I like the shift in emotions in this poem. though, and there is spiritual feeling in the imagery, which I think works. And I agree with that. I think maybe, there's the subject matter. There's a bit of a feeling behind it. You can tell that the poem is something that really wants to be written, which is an important part of a poem too. That's something that there's a feeling underlaying it that's worthy of poetry, I think. And Margaret Doyle says, I like the last stanza especially too. And yeah, so that's why it's worth exploring in different ways and making it more concrete, because there's something there, which is worth saying. So thanks for pointing that out. I'll read that last stanza again. He remembers these evenings and all that he sees. In the safety of twilight and the rain he may hide, sanctified moments in the dusk, such as these, awaken the faith that has withered and died. So there's that. Okay, let's move on to the next poem now, though. February Gray is the next. The morning sun rises in the mist, though I cannot see its blessed gleam. Sadness comes to settle my wrist. Each another day, another hopeless dream. Where's the golden that I like to hold? Where's the sun? Where's the light of day? Must life be so cheerless and cold? Must I live with February gray? What dreariness sings the awful choir? It's like I'm living in a giant bog. Perhaps in this it's better to expire than live with ghastly February fog. Ah, what can one do against such art when February gray hurts the heart? And so again, this poem, another example of the way that the concrete is so important. I think the poem really comes to life when we get these more interesting descriptions of the setting. So what dreariness sings against this awful choir. An awful choir is an interesting, description of what's going on. And then it's like I'm living in a giant bog, perhaps in this better place to expire than live with ghastly February fog. And so I think that part works the best. And it's a good example of how you can just bring, with a few little extra details that are concrete and specific, you can bring the imagery of your poem to life, and then that's something that we can enter and start to feel. Because this is the stanza of all of them where I felt the most connected to, like I was part of the poem for the first time. And I think it's that concreteness of those slightly unique, it's the specificity of those details that make the poem come to life. And so that's what we want to see more throughout, is when you have details, when you have images, really make them specific enough that they sort of sing and become a real place, so you can feel yourself entering the poem there. And this one is a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet, the ABA scheme again, with the final couplet here, the volta there. So it's a very standard traditional sonnet. I think it's a I don't think it's pentameter though, right? It's four beats. The morning sun rises in the mist, though I cannot see its blessed. I guess maybe not. It is 5. It is pentameter. I think the first line kind of scans as 4 to me, though. The morning sun rises in the mist. Well, maybe not. The morning sun rises. I guess it's pentameter all the way through. So very traditional sonnet, which I always like to see, but we still need to have concrete details. We need to take advantage of all the things that poetry can do as far as creating a space. And that's just what's missing in both these poems. So we get to share that detail, and hopefully the work improves and when we start to have that. So in both cases, go ahead, try to just add more concrete detail. Otherwise, everything's, nicely done, and there's not enough formal poetry in poetry. And so it's really great to be participating in the addition of more formal poetry. So just make it a little more concrete so we can feel more connected to the content that you're sharing. Let's see. And then Katie Dozier says, I suggest that the poet play a bit more with enjamment, more lines that carry meaning between breaks. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, and worth mentioning. I mentioned that the lack of line breaks in the last poem and why it feels like a pantoum. But there's a kind of especially in a more modern sonnet, but Shakespeare too. There's the tension between the expectation of where the rhyme's going to be, where the sentence is going to end, and where the sentence actually does. So you get this this expectation, and then it's either fulfilled or not. And either way, we get this little dopamine release of pleasure when we have this sort of model that we're setting up that's either fulfilled or not. And that's a big part of the pleasure of reading and the music of poetry, is the mix and the variety of that. And having lines more often. We had actually a couple better ones in this last stanza up here. He remembers those evenings and all that he sees in the safety. So this Enjamment, all that he sees in the safety of twilight. And then this comma here, or this parenthetical aside, in the dusk, sanctified moments in the dusk, that slows it down before the break, which makes the poem feel a little less regular too. And those are the kind of things, along with Enjamment, blending over past the lines, that makes the music of the poem come to life a little more too, and not be so monotonous. Because if you fulfill our expectation every time, we stop being interested in whether or not that's going to be fulfilled, because we just learn that's right. We can, like gravity, you don't think about it, and so it helps to make that more diverse in the way that you pull out your lines. Let's see. Let me see if we have any other comments. I think we're just going to go on. Well, Rose Leonard says something too. It's a strange combination of quite formal tone and more casual. Where's not where is. The right here she's talking about. So instead of where is the light, it's where's the light. It's a colloquial, casual kind of register to say where's the light of day, and then blessed with the parenthesis is much more formal. That is a thing too that comes out, and I think finding a voice is an important part of poems too. So that's something worth thinking about. One of the things that I think works really well as far as that is having a consistent voice is actually, while you're writing, imagining a specific person speaking to another specific person, and that helps a lot too to keep it in the same register. Think of it as I actually see yourself or someone else talking to a specific person, and that'll help make that more consistent. Let's see, are there any other lines? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next poet. So that was Xavier Pimentel. We'll take a look at whatever's next. We'll find out in a second. Never Trust a Poet is the title. General questions. I've only started writing, so any feedback would be appreciated. You can find more of this poet. The poet is Matt Kennedy at Instagram.com/Farah Poetry. So we'll take a look at this. Let's see. I think I have to shrink. Let me make sure it fits on the screen for everybody. Move things around slightly. Where's the Well, that's odd. Usually Submittable has a little magnifying glass that lets us zoom in and out, and that is missing today. Okay, so maybe I guess I could do it like this. That's how we'll do it. Okay, so that gets it all on the screen. So, Never Trust a Poet, and this is the poem. And you see that the lines are very long already. Like these are not natural line breaks; they're artificially added because of the size of the page. So I don't know if that's going to mean anything or not. We'll see in a second. The title up here was Never Trust a Poet. Let's give it a read. A silver tongue. They can create masterful, constructed paradises, stitching perfectly chosen words. They can warm your every comfort with the depth of their love. Never trust a poet. The power in their art will weave into your emotions and connecting beats in unison, though retain all focus as you may feel their words are written for you to behold. Though we're never their heart's treasure for you to take. Their sweet seduction dancing from their mind can evolve into darkness heavy as the boulder, now finding home in your chest. They say never trust a poet. I say this is their art. Their art is their powerfully understood emotions, filling the vast blue with pink cotton candy pillows soft as the exposed life on their sleeve, pumping lava flowing in the veins, scorching their pain. They say never trust a poet. I say it's the deepest connection to trust. So that's the first poem of two, Never Trust a Poet. And one of the things that we already mentioned the lines, I thought this was going to come up, and you never know, because sometimes there's a purpose for having long lines this long. It looks like if I scroll all the way out, am I right? Yeah, I'm not sure, and maybe it's just a formatting issue, but there's no sense of what the line breaks actually should be. And so we talk about the concept of plating a poem, like in culinary, craft. The idea of when you present a meal, presenting it on a way that it's visually appealing before somebody eats, and that's the sign of a good meal. And the same thing is true of a poem. And having poems with sort of regular line breaks and things like that is very useful to let the reader know before they even sit down and take a bite of the poem that there was some effort and attention put into this poem. And so when you submit a poem, having these long lines, it's just sort of like a block of text with no sense of how we're supposed to read it or how it's supposed to be presented. That's not a good first impression. So, I would start by, and we can just do this. I can put this content over in another file and, add some line breaks to it. But we could really quickly go through. Let me get this to fit on the screen, though. But we could go, create masterful. I think this should be masterfully constructed phrases, but you get the idea. Perfectly chosen words. If we just have, a regular line length to start with, there's a very basic way to help us read. Even if it's like, we can even do weird line breaks if it helps. But just having line breaks like this somehow, it helps the poem feel like it's presented better. So that's the first thing we want to talk about. And then, and the second thing, like we were talking about the last thing, the concrete details are really where something lives. It's the specificity of detail, not the generality that we want. There's this assumption that we think very often that if something is more general, it's more relatable. But the opposite is actually true. We want as specific, as concrete details as possible that we can find in order to create this world that feels real to the reader. And so the poem becomes a little bit more lively toward the end when we get to pink cotton candy pillows as soft as the exposed life of their sleeve pumping, lava flowing in their veins. At least those are things that we can see. And so we want to see and feel those and have more concrete images like that and make them unique. Those are the things that make poetry really stand out. Let's see. And Nate Jacob says, who's saying never to trust us? Yeah. And then the other thing, too, I think it's important. The poem, another point we can make, I guess, to say is you never trust a poet as the title. And then the poem ends up being these reasons why we should, trust a poet in the end. It feels very much like it's written toward the, like we had an idea for what we wanted to write, and then we pushed toward it and shared this idea for making a poem out of someone saying never trust a poet. And we knew the conclusion before we were going to start. As soon as I saw Never Trust a Poet, I knew where the poem was going to go. It's going to go to say, actually, yeah, you should trust a poet. and these are the reasons why. So it feels very much like an essay, like it's an argument. And a poem's not an argument. A poem is a way to sort of, in a non-linear way, in like a non-rational way, solve a problem, answer a question, solve a riddle. So a poem should start with something that, like why does it bother you that somebody said never trust a poet? And then that's the thing to interrogate and analyze until you come up with some solution that surprises yourself. You didn't know that this is why it bugs you. Maybe it's because your father said this and you have this feeling of never living up to your father. That's what we find out, that's really the source of the irritation from that kind of statement. So that's the kind of thing, too, that we want to do. We want to write toward mystery and not write toward an answer to something we've already have the answer to. And so the poem feels very directed in that way. And we want to, really the whole point of poetry is to free ourselves up and let our subconscious, that creative, magical, mysterious part deep within ourselves, to be able to speak. And if we know the conclusion that we're writing toward before we start out, it's not going to work. We need something that's like bugging us, it's some little itch that you're trying to scratch and some kind of thing you're trying to make sense of. And that's really the source of great poetry. Mark Goodyear says, make it more personal, they, who. And that's another thing, too, is bringing out, that goes along with the specificity. Like we think having this abstract subject, the speaker of the poem is somebody that, if it's somebody sort of amorphous that we don't know, it could be anybody, then we feel like it's like every man, and then it's good. But no, it's much better if you have a very specific person. because then we can relate. We go in that person's shoes and we feel like we're someone else. We get the huge boost of empathy and we start to feel it ourselves, the same thing that the speaker's feeling. And so having specific, personal details is something that makes a poem come to life too. So that's something. Let's take a look quickly at the second poem. And again, the poet is Matt Kennedy. Here's the second poem, is Angel's Cry. And again, we have the same thing to say about the long lines. It could be just this was what happened when pasting it into the submittable field, and maybe the line breaks were lost. But you can see that. Like, you can log into your submittable submission and see that and fix it if it's not working. So do, plate the poem better. Make the poem look like you know what you're doing, and that'll help. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, as they say. And the first impression is just how the poem looks on the page, if it looks like there's been some effort put into it. So make it look pretty. Make it look like it's clean and neat. It's much nicer to look at, like neatly cut hedges than this sort of mob of weeds, and that's kind of the feeling. Like, weed your poem, like trim the edges, and it just looks better. That's what Angel's Cry. Unequivocally, his emaciated figure remains only but a shadow of the masterful guide. Mortar holding motionless structures within, now crushed, blurred, direction saturated. The puppet master plays devil's advocate, creating dreamscapes, trailing the levels in his mind, yearning the unclenching of the silk threads, cradling the dewdrops, tears with more love as his angels cry. The softness and a forever remaining romance of a clutched, compressed in love from his creation start to fade, spawning purpose to the pain. So that is Angel's Cry. As Nate Jacobs points out, both poems started with adverbs, unequivocally, and the other one is a silver tongue, but there are a lot of adverbs in this one too. And again, adverbs and adjectives are a sign of a lot of show don't tell. A lot of trying to convey the emotion as an emotion. Like an adverb is like a category of feeling, and we want the poem itself, the world that we create, to convey that feeling, not the words. Because words don't transfer as strongly, and that's what really people mean by show don't tell. Yeah. So anyway, so tighten this stuff up, more concrete details and more personal things. We want to really hear the stories behind these poems. That's what makes poetry come to life. It makes us feel connected to the reader, which makes us expand our own understanding of our own lives. And that's why we read poetry. And it's in those specific details. Be personal, tell the actual story, and make the story come to life. It's trying to tell like a story, like a film would or a novel would, within a few lines of poetry. And that's what we're aiming for here. Okay, let's continue to the next poet. We've gone through 2 so far. Next up, we have, we'll see, The Magical Mystery Door. This is Toxic. The poet, here we go, Toxic. And the poet is Samantha Blakeney. Samantha Blakeney. And Samantha says, if I pull this up, we have this question field, for general questions. How do you make your poems good and make people feel what they read? Well, we talked about that already. So Samantha, if you're here, a lot of the stuff, the answers to that question is what we've already seen, which is to have things be, create a scene that's very concrete, that feels like a real world with very specific details, as much specificity as possible, and be personal and tell the whole story, and don't couch things, don't be general, because there's no connection and feeling in generalities. It just doesn't exist. Okay. So let's read this poem, Toxic. I cannot take it anymore. I'm about to have a mental breakdown. I have no one to talk to. It is hard not having a family. The worst thing in the world is to feel trapped. Feeling alone is not fun without help or concerns from anyone. No family to talk to and no one to just vent. I wish I had someone who could understand my pain. I cannot talk to anyone because I am in a toxic relationship. Who will be there for me? Does God even care for me? Does he hear me cry? Does anyone hear me cry for help? It hurts. No one cares. What is the point? Why am I here? I do not care anymore about anything. Why should I? And so that's Toxic, again, by Samantha Blackney. And, for this poem, you can feel the difference between this, just because it's so personal and honest. It's someone exploring their actual feelings from a questioning place. So it already does a lot of things we were talking about in the last two poems not doing, which is being personal and coming from a place of questioning versus answering. But then after that, at that point, we do come into, and Paul Mitchell Bernstein says too, read good poets is, of course, the key to writing poetry that really works. Because we have, there's an issue. So there's the idea that some poems are supposed to be personal and you're written for yourself or for some specific person who knows the context. And then other poems are written for the public to share because they're made in a way that's memorable and we keep them with us. And for this, we go back to, this has the personal level. I feel the emotion. I feel, sadness for the speaker here in this poem. And I can, relate to it, and my heart kind of goes out to it as I'm reading the poem. But there's nothing to sort of grab on and hold and remember from it, because it's not full of music and not full of sort of specific details or ways of phrasing things that are unique and new that sort of light up my brain by hearing new ways to talk about sadness. What a poem's trying to do is create a new way of looking at the world for the person who reads it. And a lot of times that's through finding new metaphors, for new images to represent the feelings, new phrases and sounds that we can, like sound bites that we can remember, little quotes that stay with us, certain lines that are really memorable, or the whole poem being memorable that we can call back as a touchstone. And I think that's what's missing here, are those details that make it a public poem that we'll remember after reading it. We'll remember for a while that we felt sad for reading this poem, but there's not that concrete detail and that music that make a poem memorable. So I think you have to decide first. I think the poem is very functional. It really helps a lot because a poem is a kind of self-therapy. It's a kind of way of exploring our emotions and making more sense of our world. And it's great to be doing that. It's really helpful on a personal level. And this poem, I think, does that because it tells a story. I cannot take it anymore. I'm about to have a mental breakdown. Like going into that and then diving into that, I think it's scientifically proven and through many testimonials, of people who find a lot of healing in the process of journaling and writing a diary, writing poems that explore their own emotions. It helps you sort of make sense of them. It helps you sort of have a concrete, a place to put them that's not like inside of yourself. It's really helpful. It's great to do. But if you want to be sharing poems with other people, and then the key is to read, I suggest too, I think SRH says... So SRH says, that's Mary Oliver's advice, read. And SRH says, I say read Mary Oliver. And I suggest too, I think it'd be great to start with maybe Mary Oliver. Any poet that's really expressing things, emotions beautifully is a great place to start. And so, get a book of poems by Mary Oliver, read those, and then notice the way that she uses images, scenes, nature, metaphor to paint the picture so that we see things in a different way. Because this poem presents something that we can relate to, and we can all understand having those kind of feelings that are just frustrated and sad, and we feel empathy after reading it. But there's not anything that we're taking away from it when we leave the poem. And so if you want to have a public poem that people are going to want to read and share, then it's adding those kind of things and reading great poets. Paul Michael Bernstein says too, E. Cummings is a favorite. Yeah, E. Cummings is great. So find a poet that you like their poems and read a lot of their poetry. And that's how to make it a poem that lasts for an audience. Okay. So let's move on to the next poet. But thanks so much for sharing that, Samantha. Let's see what we have next. This is Land of Enjamment. And you see, this is interesting. Land of Enjamment is a prose poem or written as prose with right-left justified text. And I bet if I have the page, it'll... Actually, no, it's stuck in that way. But let's see how that works. And then let's see if there's any general comments. Nope, no general comments this time. The poet is Edward Sheehy. So we'll take a look at Edward Sheehy. Land of Enjamment. Already, Paul Mitchell Bernstein says, cool title, and I agree. I like the little rhyme there, Land of Enjamment. There's a slightly off but close rhyme there in the title itself, making it a memorable title. And it's something that's evocative. We know what enjamment means because we're poets. You know, we're around enjamment relatively often, and so it's something that sort of evokes evokes a kind of mystery, like what's going on, with the land of enjamment. So I'm curious to read this poem now. So it's a really good title to start out. Let's read it. New Mexico, land of enjamment, just follow the flow as far as it will, go without punctuation, though every gill and molecule relentless, wise, ever-flowing Tao of aqua, add it all up, deduct 10%, throw in free shipping, and jam baby music in the gazebo, sonic soul, surf early, Dickdale sliding, into fusion jazz surf, breaking on a reef, somewhere having safe stratosphere sax, finish strong, walk, don't run, up Canyon Road, dreamscape of excessive dreams, mark down your choice of color and hue and jam, baby. Green chilies and black coffee snap the synapses into action for the hard labor and thought that goes into deciding what is best in terms of price and quality and artistic merit from amongst a field of sculpted, polished rock slabs from which a small stream of water dribbles, from a pipe in the top like a public fountain at a bus station, and then suddenly realizing what kind of fool buys an artisanal water fountain for a semi-arid xeriscape of native cacti and prairie sagebrush during a drought, no less. And then I remember land of enjamment, baby, just follow the flow. So that's it's a fun poem, and I was wondering where it was going to go. And if it was going to be useful. Nate Jacobs says, I use enjamment as a replacement for cussing in front of my kids. I think that's a great idea, enjamment. And SRH happens to be in New Mexico now, so that's good to see too. Apparently the land of enjamment. Now, so the one thing, so this is a free stream of consciousness type poem. And yeah, as the Flea Dane says, it's fun. Paul Mitchell Bernstein says language is evocative and fun, but the reader has no chance to breathe. It's true, but that's kind of the point. So it's hard to criticize that because that's the main central part of the poem. It's energetic, says Nate Jacob, and it is. This is a fun one. I'm not sure. I think it's one of those poems where I enjoyed my time with the poem. If it was a submission, I would enjoy it, and I would say, like, does it leave me with enough going away? Am I going to remember this poem in the future? Let's see. D. Coleman loves it. Yeah, Monica Jacobs says it reads like slam poetry. So Dick Westheimer says, and this is what I was kind of getting at too. Dick Westheimer says, so not to belabor the point, but what's at stake for the poet? And that's the thing. I'm not sure. I'm not feeling. It's fun play with language, but I'm not sure what to take away from the poem. What the yeah. So let's see. Nate Jacobs says it would be hilarious if we now broke this down into lines and punctuated it. Viva la irony. Yeah, and so Dick asks what's at stake for the poem or for the poet, and that's the kind of thing. There's no sense of the gravity of it to me on the first read through of the like, why did this have to be written and why did I have to read it? And that's what I mean by I'm not sure what to take from it. And I wonder if it's enough. But it is fun. And sometimes it's fun just to have fun. I don't want to put that down either. So let's read it one more time and just think, now that we know sort of the sense of it. I'll read through one more time and see if we have any other comments about it, what we could do with it. Or maybe it just does enough on its own. Let's see. Land of Enjamment. I'll take a sip of this coffee before I read. Okay. New Mexico, land of enjamment. Just follow the flow as far as it will go. There are a few things, and I'll point out this too. There are a few things, even within the structure of the prose poem, that's sort of never ending and you can't stop and take a breath. There are a few things where the rhythm, even though it's not metered, where the meter and the rhythm feel off. And it's hard to, I mean, I could break apart where the stresses are and why, but there's just a feeling in certain places that I'll point out because it'd be hard to break down. But New Mexico, land of enjambment, just follow the flow as far as it will go. There's like one too many syllables there, if you can hear that. So New Mexico, land of enjambment, just follow the flow as far as it goes. Sounds much better. And there's, you have to listen for that. There's something about the repetition and the pattern that's coming out in the music of that language to pay attention to. And there's a few places like that where it feels a little off, even though it's already hard to read because there's no punctuation and it just runs and runs and runs. There's still a music to it. And it's almost like you have an extra 2 beats in a musical line. It would confuse everybody listening and it wouldn't feel like music for a second and you'd be kind of like confused. That happens in speech too. And I think that happens there. Anyway, just follow the flow as far as it will go, without punctuation, through every gill and molecule, relentless wise, ever-flowing Tao of aqua, add it all up, deduct 10%, throw in free shipping, and jam, baby. See, I think the thing that I'm not sure what to take from the poem is that in jam, baby refrain, and I'm not sure what that is and what to make of it. It seems like it has more significance than other lines because it's repeated, but then I don't know what that significance is. So I don't know. I feel a little left out of the poem, maybe a little lost in that spot, and maybe that's part of why I'm not sure, what's at stake, as Dick says. But anyway, free shipping and jam, baby, music in the gazebo, sonic soul, surf, early Dickdale, sliding into fusion jazz, surf, breaking on a reef, somewhere having safe, stratosphere sax, finish strong, walk, don't run. And at this point, I was wondering if there's some musical references that I'm not getting. Because as Tom Barlow just said, as I was about to say it, the capitalization there seems sort of, in other places too. It makes me wonder if it's quoting titles of songs or something like that. I'm not really sure what. And then I really think that when I get the walk, don't run, I wonder if that's the title of a song and that's why that section's capitalized. And Canyon Road too. I mean, even though you would capitalize Canyon Road, but it's right there. I'm just kind of confused about the capitalization, and I feel like I'm missing something. And maybe it's just that I am, but I don't know what. Anyway, finish strong, walk, don't run, up Canyon Road, dreamscape of excessive dreams, marked down by your choice of color and hue and jam, baby, green chilies and black coffee, snap the synapses into action for the hard labor and thought that goes into deciding what is best in terms of price and quality and artistic merit from amongst a field of sculpted, polished rock slabs from which a small stream. For me, this is where the poem starts to take off and become more interesting. It feels a little hodgepodge up to there. And then here we get, I think we get, you can always sense to me this sort of when the subconscious is more speaking and we're letting ourselves play with language without forcing anything out. And I think that sort of kicks in here a little bit when we get to the artistic merit amongst a field of sculpted, polished rock slabs. And there's something about that, like sculpted, polished rock slabs. It's like perfect pacing too, which is a sense that we're not being conscious and we're letting that creative part of ourselves speak. So it's nice. Anyway, sculpted, polished rock slabs from which a small stream of water dribbles from a pipe in the top like a public fountain at a bus station. So we were talking in the previous poems about how important it is to have specific detail. And it doesn't have to be fancy specific detail, but a pipe on the top of a public fountain at a bus station is like so specific and unique and strange that it really stands out. And that's the kind of concrete images we were talking about that were missing in the previous poems we've looked at today. So that's a great example there. And it feels like that sprang, no pun intended, out of the subconscious, which is what I'm always looking for as an editor, is that sense of creativity that's just flowing out of you. And I think that it turns on, it's a peak in the poem right there. Anyway, public fountain at a bus station, and then suddenly realizing what kind of fool buys an artisanal water fountain for a semi-arid xeriscape. I'm not sure what that word is. Of native cacti and prairie sagebrush during a drought, no less. And then I remember land of enjambment, baby, just follow the flow. Yeah. So Nate Jacob says that the correct word is artesian. Does that say artisan instead of artesian? Maybe that was just a typo that I read through. But yeah, I'm on artesian well water in my home base of Wrightwood. the best water in the United States, snowmelt filtered through limestone in an artesian well. You could bottle it and sell it, but we don't because we keep it for ourselves. Anyway, well, I can't even pull it out, but yeah, it should be artesian. This heart thing. Okay, I was blocking my comments. YouTube was. Let's see. So, yeah, so Emily DeFerrari says there's something disturbing, I believe intentionally here, and Jam Baby makes me think of Drill Baby Drill and evokes for me a world of distraction and overconsumption. Yeah, there's something, bubbling beneath the surface of the poem, and I agree that that's what it is. But I don't know, I feel like, so Nate Jacobs looked up Xeriscape for us too. That's a waterless landscape. Thanks, Nate. Sorry. So, yeah. The source of Enjamment, Baby, it feels like there's a source. It's quoting something or that doesn't come through. I think it's missing that detail. Dick Westheimer adds a detail I didn't know. Dick Dale was a great guitarist who pioneered surf music. Look up Miserlou, I guess, for an iconic example of his work, which was a fusion of Egyptian and rock music. That's fascinating. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Dick. I have to definitely look that up later. But yeah, so as Emily said, there's something disturbing underneath, and it is this sense of like drill, but like use up the water as we're being distracted by almost the fluidity of our entertainment. Yeah, and so Nate Jacobs says, I like this poem enough to reread. It has a wryness to it that makes me want to figure it out. And I agree, too. And the problem for me is that I don't quite figure it out. And it's the Enjam. And I wonder, I think Enjam Baby and Jam, I think it needs more of an explanation for why it's that so we can follow. If it's quoting something, if it's doing something that just doesn't come across. So maybe an epigram to explain that if there's a source that it's referring to. The fact that in Jam Baby and Jam repeats it makes me. I just keep thinking that maybe there's songs because we do talk about surf music and sax. I just feel a little left out of this poem and I want to access it more. And I do read a lot and I don't know a lot about. But nobody can know everything either. So you can look up, is Dick Dale enough of an access to what we're talking about? I don't know. It's a poem it's fun and entertaining. I enjoy reading it. I want to read it again, but then I still ultimately feel left out at the end because I can't really resolve what it's actually doing. Tom Rellis says Land of Enjamment versus Land of Enchantment. Yeah, and yeah, but I don't understand what that means really. And I think, I don't know. I just feel a little too lost. I think I'd like a little more clarity. Let's see. So Paul Mitchell Bernstein says one of the tallest perpetual fountains in the world is outside of Tempe, Arizona. So that's an interesting detail. Oh, but that's not New Mexico, though. That's Arizona. Yeah, so Bular Shafiei says, enjamment as a poetic term may cloud whatever this is trying to say. There's the irony of no line breaks, but what it's trying to say and needing to be clever may create an ambiguity. Yeah, I mean, that's what... It's a balance. You want poems to feel mysterious and sort of more like, they're saying more than can be said simply. But you also don't want the reader to feel lost and left out. And I think we're a little too far on the side of lost and left out. I just like a little more access to the poem somehow. One of the things I think maybe, unless there's something that we could explain for Enjam, Baby, and Jam, like that kind of idea, if it feels because it repeats, it's the only thing that keeps repeating. It feels like it's like the key to the poem, but then we don't get the key. And so we might feel better about it if we only had that sense of Enjam Baby like once. That might help. SRH is doing great Googling. Also, says Artesia is a town in New Mexico. I mean, that's interesting too. I mean, that could play into it. There's just not enough to go on. We're sort of, we're puzzling things out. In a poem, really, a poem's not like a puzzle, and it's not a rational argument. Like, it's not an essay. A poem is its own kind of thinking, which is where we're letting the music of speech sort of lull our rationality to sleep so we can see the bigger connections between things and the things that we have in common, and we can relate on a deeper, like, physical level. And it's too sort of slow to be a puzzling something out is too slow to have that kind of transference work. And so we need more access points so we don't, and maybe somebody can figure out how all the pieces fit together, but I can't, and I've been working on this poem for 15 minutes or so. It's just we need more access to it, and that's the only problem, though. It's fun language. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. And once again, that was a poem by Edward Sheehy. Somebody asked, where was it? I thought I saw somebody ask. Oh, Dolly asked, will I get a notification on Submittable if we review a poem? Yeah, I'm having a hectic schedule. I'm not able to follow up with the videos. Yeah, so what I do get a notification. Usually I pick out 2 poems, a few days ahead of time, like a week ahead of time, or I guess 5 days ahead of time usually. And you get a notification, this Friday your poem's coming up. But then every once in a while, like every other month or every 6 weeks or so, we do this where I'm just looking at the oldest poems and we're trying to get through as many as possible so we can stay caught up. I'm up to August 15th of 2022 right now. We'll do a couple more and maybe that'll clear me up, and so no one's waiting more than a year. In this case, all the people that are seen today, I will update you with a note as soon as the show's over, so you can go back and look at it because you didn't expect it to happen today. Anyway, let's look at the next one. We are looking at Sunal Gupta. No general comments and just a short poem here. Pasted into the Submittable, as happens often. Again, this is Sunal Gupta. This is, September 5th, so we're caught up, less than a year old now. The title is in the title field only, Life a Tryst of Mysteries. And again, this is what it's like reading submissions. Like you click on, you have no idea what's going to come up, and it's kind of fun. Why we are born and why do we die? Is 12 hours around the clock, the day even loses its bright. We are merely mortal beings which needs to merge into an immortal light. This is the principal birth, as we are born to enkindle our kinds. But who knows of departure, when turned to cinder would be the only sign. But what is left are the philosophies of his or her life in nurturing the world to survive, thrive, and revive. And then that closes the parentheses. Where did it open? Did I not? Yeah, I'm not sure. So there should be some kind of parentheses opening that as a quote. So I'm not sure what's supposed to be quoted. And for this, so one of the things we don't want, or usually don't want, we talked about this a little bit with the very first submission, how there was very little enjamment, which is where the sentence, the syntax of the sentence flows past the end of the line. And here we all end with punctuation, each line, which ends in a very sort of a choppy feel. There's no tension between that sense of line and the music of the syntax. And so you're sort of missing out on that aspect of poetry by having these sort of end-stopped rhymes, and also or end-stopped lines, especially when it's rhyming too, which a lot of these lines do. There ends up being a sort of a sing-songy, a boringness to, we get exactly what we expect every time. And so especially if you're using rhyming poems, end rhyme I'm talking about, like, Bright Light. There's a bunch of where is it? There are a few end rhymes here. If you're using end rhyme, you want to vary that so that it's not always ending, the syntax and the line and the rhyme are all at the same spot in a way that you can predict, because it gets boring. So, and otherwise, besides for that, all the same stuff that we've always been talking about applies to this poem. It's there's a sense of being general to it, not having a sense of who the speaker is, not being personal, and not being really concrete. There's this sort of vagueness to the details here, and there's a sense that sort of an assumption that we have that's incorrect, that if we're general, we'll be more relatable, but that's not at all true. We want to have as much specificity as possible because that's what we can connect to. And so be specific, tell the story, don't make us hunt for it, and let us know who the people are and the details around it. As Tom Barlow says, speaking of the we rather than I makes it feel reserved. Yeah. A very distant poem, says SRH. Yeah. And, yeah. And Dick Westheimer says, I understand the impulse to use his or her, and her as inclusive speech, but as poets, we need to find a way around that awkward construction other than reverting to there. And yeah, that's true too. I mean, we have to be careful about, but if we were being personal, we wouldn't have to use constructions like that in the first place. And as SRH says, show. We just need concrete details. We need the story. We want to hear your story and connect with it and relate to it. And so you just have to tell us the actual story. It's just too general for us to connect with. So Paul Mitchell Bernstein says, write a poem about each sentence. That's an interesting exercise that would really help, actually. Because when you have a poem that's too general, what we need is to expand that out with detail, and that would work. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Try to get to as many as we can. We've gotten through 5, which is nice. Usually we only do 2. This is Janet Goldberg. We're up to September 19th of last year. We'll see if Janet has any questions. No general questions. It's not the tuna. Which reminds me of that Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't know, that kindergarten cop, that line. You have to look it up. Anyway, it's not the tuna. I'm walking to Vaughn's to buy some tuna, but who am I kidding? I'm walking to Vaughn's to walk, just to walk. Why to Vaughn's? Why tuna? Does everything I do have a purpose? And who am I asking anyway? Not me, I hope. I have no answers. I pray to the trees that bother to bend my way. They're the ones with secrets. Sweep your secrets in the wind, I pray. I'll turn to catch them with open face and open mouth and open eyes. Fill me up, I pray. Fill me with lusciousness. I know lusciousness. It's vanilla ice cream dripping from a cone into my tongue. Its fingertip touches when love passes by. It's running through sprinklers and mothers happy, and I am 3. So very nice turn there. It's interesting. So I was talking with one of the poems earlier about how important it is to write into a mystery and not into an answer. Write into a question. And SRH says, haven't we read this poem before? Sounds very familiar. The title sounded familiar to me too, actually. Maybe we had this on a critique or something otherwise. Yeah, but anyway, this is not a tuna. And what's interesting is that you can feel that writing into a question and how much better that works, how much we're compelled to go along hunting for the answer with you as you do it. It's sort of a, no tears for the reader, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader, which I always say backwards. But there's like no mystery for the writer, no mystery for the reader, and we're drawn to mystery, and so we want that journey, that sense of something happening. Sharon Fronte and Emily say it sounds familiar too. We might have done this poem. It might have been submitted twice. But I'll just say the same thing. What I was going to say about it anyway is that you can really feel where it's diving into the mystery in a subconscious way. Like we talk about this all the time, or I do, that you can read a submission and listen to it. It's almost like you're listening to, flipping through a radio dial, and you're tuning in, and sometimes there's static, and then there's some music on a station. You can hear the truth of a deep voice, whatever it is, inside of a poem. And you can hear it really clearly in this poem where it comes in and out. And so we start out with a question. I'm walking to Vaughn's to buy some tuna, but who am I kidding? I'm walking to Vaughn's to walk, just to walk. Why Vaughn's? Why tuna? So we have this questioning, and it's a very real, authentic question. I feel like we don't know the answer as the speaker speaking this, as the writer's writing this, and that's really compelling us to continue forward to find the answer and where we go with it. Does everything I do have a purpose? So these rhetorical questions work a lot. It's that Hegelian or Socratic dialectic, or whatever the heck you call it, where you ask things. And or Platonic, I don't know what the heck. I'm bad with all the Greeks and the Romans and stuff, but whatever it is, it's the answering questions and answering that really propel a lot of thought and stimulate our brains. So it's working there. Does everything I do have a purpose? And who am I asking anyway? Not me, I hope. I have no answers. So it felt to me like these questions didn't really have answers, and then we say that they don't have answers right here. And so I think that this is something I'd probably cut. But then we'd take this surprising leap. So I think we could cut this, which seems sort of, I didn't know what to say, so I had to keep writing because that's what I'm doing in this practice that I'm at right now. I think you could cut this out and jump right to here, which is a surprising thing. I pray to the trees that bother to bend my way. I like that, bother to bend my way. It's a really nice line, interesting way to put it, and it's a little surprising. And they're the ones with secrets is a great little line too. They're the ones with secrets. I really love this little turn here. Sweep your secrets into the wind, I pray. When it goes to the I pray, it stops feeling that sense of surprise. Do you feel that sense of surprise sort of disappear? Because it kind of does. It feels like I pray, like I didn't know where to go as I was writing. And I added I pray and sort of pushed the poem to continue, but I'm sort of forcing it again. And the surprise isn't coming out. And so then we get these lines. I turn to catch them with open face and open mouth and open eyes. Fill me up, I pray. Fill me with lusciousness. And feel like devoid of surprise, that is, and devoid of like a deeper truth. Like there's nothing really going on there. It's sort of a forced, it feels again like a writing exercise. Whereas in the same way that not me, I hope I have no answers, feels like an exercise. And then we get the surprise where it's not an exercise and something deeper is trying to speak here. And then we lose that thread, it goes back, and then we catch it again. I know luscious. And so see how this luscious, which was a sort of a forced line that my conscious put in there as I'm trying to keep the poem going, that triggered a kind of memory or some kind of connection in the deeper part of the brain, the right brain or whatever it is. And then we have this little referee, but I know luscious. It's vanilla ice cream dripping from a cone onto my tongue. Its fingertip touches when love passes by. It's running through the sprinklers, and mother's happy I'm 3. Maybe we got maybe we did. We've definitely seen this one where everyone's saying it, and I think we have. Yeah. Yeah, and so you can see, though, my point, which is just I'm trying to make general points that are beyond specific poems anyway, so it doesn't matter that we saw this before. But you can feel where there's that, it's reaching a deeper place where we're surprising ourselves as we write. And those are the places where the poem is really working, this stuff, which is really nice. And I think if we talked about it before, I mentioned that this was nice before. And that the we bother to bend my way is nice before. And that these parts are forced. And so really one of the things, if you write in this way, there's sort of different ways to write. People all do it differently. But if you write in this way where you're sort of trying to find your free self, which is, I guess, maybe it is universal. We are all trying to find it. We find it in different places. Some find it in revising. Some find it in form and meter. Some find it in sort of the freedom of a stream of consciousness type thing. But if you're one of those that find it in a stream of consciousness, you got to listen for it and see in the poem where it's occurring, and then find ways to cut everything that's not that. And so this poem would be helped still if we cut out these things that don't work. And so we'll get them down even farther. Okay, let's do one more. So I do think we saw that one before. That's the only one submitted. Let's see. And what do we have next? Treasure. Now this looks like a short story. And so I will just say, Treasure. Once upon a time, there were 2 cousins who never met each other. Their grandpa used to be really rich. So this is, there's a question of like, what's prose poetry and what's a poem and what's just prose? What's a short story? And it's an interesting question. But I think this is too long and too story-like to be poetry. And just a reminder that we are a poetry magazine. We're published by a poetry nonprofit. Our mission is to promote the practice of poetry. So as much as I do like to read fiction, I think this is too much fiction for me. So that's Dana now, and just pay attention to where you're submitting and what you're submitting for would be my advice for this one. But this is what reading submissions is like. You never know what's going to come up. Let's see what's next. We have N.K. Mandel. We're up to September 24th, which is good. So it's 11 months old. And one poem here. Any questions? My poem uses traditional form and some strict rhyme and meter structures. I want to know if its formalism harms the poem too much. So we'll see. We'll take a look at this. This is The Valley. And again, the poet is N.K. Mandel. My head is ravenous. It needs to feed, but I have nothing. No clonazepam, no Ambien, no dolls, not even weed. I've done all that my shrink asked. Swam, walked, ran, and talked. Nothing helps. I still need a dose of something, or else my diaphragm would blow to bits. I hastily search shelves, but find no pills, and deeper his mind delves into chaos and derangement and violence. Afflicted, then his body would find its way to survive, as the stranded man does through abstinence. He runs towards the kitchen. What does he wish to contrive? His hand picks up a knife, turns toward the other hand and reaches for the wrist, and draws a fissure, and waits for the rewards his body would soon bestow. His mind wouldn't resist. My flesh opens up like China rose blooms during springs. A volcano erupts and its lava calmness brings. So, so that's this poem. Yeah. Okay. So that's The Valley. The question was if the rhyme is obtrusive, and I was gonna say no at all. It's nice, and that formal element is a nice addition to the poem, except for the very end. The last couplet here is inverted just to fit the rhyme. So it forces brings to be the last word just so it rhymes with spring, and you can't do that because that throws you out of the poem. And so that's one place that the formal element is obtrusive and kind of hinders the poem, like you asked. I think it does. Just in this couplet, though, the rest I felt was nice. And so I would, focus on just making sure you don't do that. A volcano erupts and its lava calmness brings. Normally it's not how we talk. We would say its lava brings calmness, but we can't do that. And so we've inverted that line to make it fit the rhyme. And that just ruins the poem. It makes you realize you're reading a poem. It doesn't feel that sense of sort of completeness and inevitability. It feels like at least some kind of writing exercise where the rhyme was shoehorned in, and so we don't want to do that. That's the thing we want to avoid. So that at the very end, it doesn't work. But the rest I thought worked nicely. What else we say? My head, The Valley. My head is ravenous. It needs to feed. But I have nothing, no clonazepam, no Ambien, no dolls, not even weed. I've done all that my shrink asked, swam, walked, ran, talked, nothing helps. I still need a dose of something. See, with all the enjambment, we talked about enjambment before, like that nicely enjammed rhyme, or line with the rhyme on need and weed and feed. So we're pulling through the rhymes here. We get end-stopped rhyme, we get a comma-stopped rhyme, we get an end-stopped rhyme. We get the start of a list, which is almost the way you read a list. It's almost like the comma isn't there because you read a list pretty quickly. And then we get the full enjambment of this. I still need a dose of something. And see how pleasant that feels? And that's the strength of enjambment right there, and especially in a poem that rhymes, to vary those lines, to make it not end-stopped the whole time and make those strong stops with the rhyme gets too predictable and boring. And that, that keeps us alive. I think the beginning of this poem is really nicely done as far as the rhymes go and the formal structure. I still need a dose of something, or else my diaphragm would blow to bits. And the first, and talking too about where the subconscious sort of goes away and the consciousness comes in. The blow to bits is a kind of a cliche. It's a idiom that we use. Blow to bits, blown to bits, like blown to smithereens. And so that sort of pulled us out of the sort of spontaneity, that spontaneous, deeper voice. And then you see that the next line becomes pretty clunky. I hastily search shelves, but find no pills. And deeper his mind delves. And deeper his mind delves. Again, we inverted because it would be his mind delves deeper. And then the shelves and the delves, it feels forced to make a word that rhymes. So this line is off here. And really, it's just this whole couplet here feels off. Whereas this really felt nice up until that point. I like that. I like those rhymes a lot. Into chaos and derangement and violence. Afflicted then, his body would find its way to survive. And see, so we lost this thread of of creative energy. And you can feel it being forced. You can feel it just in the lines being longer than they should be. I mean, these lines were coming out, and you can see how a poem was written if you read enough poems, just by that kind of sense. Like all of a sudden lines, and it's with this blow to bits, which is like a false turn. We let ourselves become self-conscious with that blow to bits, and then we get this clunky line, and then we get these longer lines that don't fit the form. See how quickly the rhymes were coming. It just felt so natural up here, and then we get these clunky longer lines. Afflicted then, his body would find its way to survive. Like, feel how wordy that is compared to the rest. There's so many extra sounds in between before you get to the end of the line in that rhyme there. As a stranded man does through abstinence. And it's vague in a way. It's general in a way that I'm not quite sure I follow it even. Whereas the beginning was really easy to follow too. And so it's a great example of the space we're trying to get in as creative writers. Is that space where we're acting spontaneously and letting things happen and surprising ourselves. And there's some deeper voice that we're trying to find a way to speak. And it's like a meditation that lets us get there. And then we lose it. And once we lose it, we have to recognize that we lost it and cut that stuff out and try to find it again. And so these last two poems are actually similar in that regard too. As a stranded man does through abstinence, he runs towards the kitchen. What does he wish to contrive? And again, the contrive is ironically contrived. Like the rhyme to get to contrive is kind of contrived. So we really lost the thread here, and it started right there with the blow to bits. His hand picks up a knife, turns towards the other hand, and reaches for the wrist. And now we see that it starts to be quick again. Like we found a new thread. And draws a fisher and waits for the rewards. His body would soon bestow. His mind wouldn't resist. And so we have a little where we picked up and it started working again. I think those couple lines work. And then we sort of get losing the clunkiness again. So just in general, I think the poem works really well here. The first, the first time lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, I think are great. But then the poem loses itself, finds it for a second again, and then loses itself again. And it's just a matter of keeping that voice up and keeping the rhymes going and keeping the poem going in the creative direction that it wanted to, but you sort of lost. It's like you had a fish on the line and then the line snapped or something, and we have to find that fish again, get it to bite. Okay. Let's see. And Morgan Feeney points out, too, we go from the specifics of clonazepam to just pills. Yeah, we lose that detail as well. It's a great point to make. Thanks for sharing that, Morgan. But it is. When we lose the thread of the poem, you get to and find no pills. Yeah. And it's it's the specifics that make the poem sing and that make it an experience. Kimberly McNeil says, I don't understand the title. The end speaks of suicide. Yeah, I'm not sure. So I the interesting thing is I'm never really all that interested in the actual subject of the poems. It's how the poems come to how they operate. If they're doing what they're trying to do, and so the valley does imply that it's the bottom, but then we're going to go up. That's how a valley works. It's not a cliff, it's a valley. So there's another side. And so here at the end, when my flesh opens, we'll show the end again. My flesh opens like China rose blooms during springs. A volcano erupts and its lava calmness brings. And I think it's cutting is what it's talking about. That sense of, cutting yourself, having that sense of control that they, say that brings. And to the chaos of life as a sort of a harmful self-therapy, which poetry is definitely a better therapy than that. But I think the ending, the title is actually, we talked about titles on the poetry space yesterday, and I think that is a good title because it implies that it's not suicide. That we don't, that it wasn't just a poem where we're ending the life of the speaker. It's a valley, so we're going to come out, but this was the low point. So I think that the title does some work there, which is nice. I mean, we want a title to do something, to add something to the poem, because it's an opportunity to add something. I think it does there. Another thing too, we haven't really talked about it yet in this broadcast, but the flesh. There's certain words. Oh, I don't know if you can see my screen when I'm highlighting things. Hang on, where's my mouse? Yeah. So the flesh. Flesh and blood and volcanoes erupting. There's certain phrases and words that are just melodramatic. They're not really cliches necessarily, but they are they're forced drama, and they're sort of like melodramatic poem cliches. And so using any kind of flesh, any kind of blood, any kind of like wounds, hearts. Those kind of things are things to avoid in a poem. It's hard to do it well because it's such a melodramatic type of concept. And so avoid, if you're gonna do a poem about cutting, have it be, you have to describe that in a way that's different than like blood blooming, like a flower, that kind of thing. So you have to find different ways to say things to make them original, because one of the things we do, we make poems stick. They kind of have a stickiness in the reader, and they stick when there's a unique, interesting way of describing something. So we always want to be striving for that stickiness. Okay. Let me look at just the last comments. This will be the last poem. We'll wrap it up. Let's see. Yeah, so Sharon Friday says the first stanza on the last two lines, good, I would cut the rest and maybe change the title. I wonder if you could, this is for the Valley we're still talking about, I assume. And, I wonder if you could do that. That was a thought I had, and then I got distracted. Could you say, let's see. So my head is ravenous, it needs to be fed, but I have nothing, no clonazepam, no Ambien, no dolls, not even weed. I've done all that, my shrink ass, swam, walked, ran, talked, nothing helps. I still need a dose of something, or else my diaphragm. I don't know. There needs to be some connection. I think the poem's just not done. I think it was a great start, and it lost its, it kind of derailed. But it's definitely just I really love the first 6 lines. I think the rhymes and the rhythm are great, and I feel connected to the reader. I think it's a poem worth carrying on. I think it just sort of derailed right there and didn't get finished. And we need to find a way, or else my diaphragm, something other than blow to bits, and then push the poem in a different sort of direction and maybe get to that ending, but a different way. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up with that. It's been a fun episode for me. I like looking at these where I don't know what's coming, and we're just looking no matter what we get. Hope you did too. It lets you to sort of talk in more generalities, ironically, to do these kind of shows. So hope you appreciated that. Let's see. We looked at a bunch of poets. I'm not going to go through the list of everybody, but it was fun doing it. Of course, as I mentioned, I notify everybody whose poems were looked at here. So hope you found that helpful. You can look at all the comments that I didn't get to because I couldn't say all the things that people were saying. You can check either on our Facebook or both on our Facebook and our YouTube streams to find those. Now, let me just say before we go that this week's guest in the Rattlecast coming up is going to be Pedro Poitevin. I find Pedro fascinating. He's a mathematician, I think at MIT, if I'm right, or UMass, somewhere in Massachusetts, as well as being a poet. Nowhere at Home, and a bilingual poet, too. He's published a few poems or books in Spanish. This is his first English language book, Nowhere at Home. And it's really going to be interesting to talk about math and the relationship of mathematics and poetry. He's also a formal poet, so there are a lot of formal poems, a lot of palindrome poems, too. Which will be interesting to look at as well, and how that works as poetry. It's something very different from what I usually do myself, so that'll be fun to talk about. And an interesting guy. I like Pedro a lot. That's Rattlecast number 208. The book is Nowhere at Home. The prompt for the week was gosh, I don't remember already. It's written everywhere. Let me pull it up quick. The prompt this week is to, I'm sure people are saying it in the comments, but I'm going to slowly get to it myself. The prompt this week was to pick a single word at random from the dictionary and use that as the title of a poem in which someone gets their hands dirty. So 2 elements, pick a single random word from the dictionary as a title so it can kind of be an extended metaphor or something. Who knows what? Push yourself in a surprising way. And then make sure in that poem someone gets their hands dirty, which is thinking about Jane Clark, last week's guest. She had a lot of single word titles, and she also had a lot of farming and stuff going on. So that's why we're coming up with that. That's going to be next week's prompt, and of course you can submit it to the Prompt Poems category for the Prompt Poem of the Month, or you can just share it, or you can do both on the Rattlecast during the open lines. But that'll be Rattlecast 208 with Pedro Portavin, Monday, August 28th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Thanks everybody for joining me now. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I'll talk to you then. Goodbye.